Now that spring has finally started to arrive in Nebraska, we're getting an awful lot of questions about winter damage in the landscape, really independent of the flood damage. I want to start by talking about shrubs and trees, especially the deciduous ones, and what you really should look for. Start by snapping a twig on anything that really appears as though it is not breaking dormancy yet. If that twig snaps, that's a former twig. But then the next thing you need to do is do the scratch test. Go down a little further on those canes or on those branches and see whether you're actually seeing anything green under that outside bark. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get great leaves, great foliage, great flowers, because you could still have an awful lot of that plant die because of the winter. However, at least you do know that there is one point where the plant is still alive. We have a lot of examples. Rose of Sharon really did a lot of dieback this year. Things like Weigelia, the button bushes. We have New Jersey tea that we're looking at as almost a perennial. So many of the plants that are showing this dieback, or at least the tip dieback, are ones that may or may not be fully hardy here to begin with. You might also see a fair amount of damage in some of the perennials and grasses in your landscape this year, especially the ones that might have been marginally hardy or were planted in the fall and really didn't get a chance to establish. The grasses in particular can show a very large dead center with only a small amount of green on the outer edges. Chrysanthemums are another example. Lavender, which really is a subshrub, might just have a little bit of foliage at the base. Again, you want to wait to make sure that you are not completely giving up on those plants until you do see some growth on the stems. Another issue with a lot of our perennials is critter damage, and this was a really good year for critter damage. You can see some trails through some of them. You can see where the centers really look like they've died out, but if you get down into those centers with your hands, you might be able to actually pull the crown up, and that is going to indicate that you had voles or gophers or mice or rabbits doing a fair amount of damage. On our woody plants, trees and shrubs, rabbits did a great deal of harm this year, and that was true in places where we had a lot of snow cover. We're seeing damage in Rose of Sharon, in euonymus, a lot of roses, many plants in the rose family where the damage is not down at the base, which would have been typical for rabbits or voles. It's up high because, of course, they stood on those snowbanks. And we're even seeing full stripping of the branches on trees. And of course, if there's not bark left, you really don't have much left to work with. Winter injury can show up in evergreens on the west or southwest side, on the side that is more exposed to the wind or against the sidewalk, or in those places where we had a lot of salt or de-icer use. If you see brown tips, brown branches, no needles, that is a former branch on evergreens. They will not refoliate. You're not going to get new needles. But again, as with all landscape plants, as we go into the spring, you want to really make sure that you know that death has occurred before you do any major pruning, whether it is on the trees, the shrubs, the evergreens, or even the perennials, to set them and get them started for the rest of the year.